I think it's hilarious how all of these Republicans that supported Trump are now speaking out and they're trying to break with him because he did what he said he was going to do and he is appointing his friends who are loyal to him to these cabinet positions. Why are y'all surprised? Like, why are y'all freaking out? Like, this is the tiniest violin for your sympathy because the man literally said he was only going to have people that were loyal to him. He has also proven that he really only cares about himself. So I don't understand why y'all are surprised. You've got people like no longer endorsing him, but the damage is done. Like you thought that you could support a man and get a man elected that would just wreak havoc on other people. Mm. You thought that he was only going to continue to wreak havoc on the people who don't look like you, right? Or who aren't the same gender identity or sexual orientation, right? Oh, but now that it's going to be something that affects your daily life, oh, now you're surprised? Like it's mind blowing. But then again, I should not be surprised. I have two thoughts about Trump. Okay. The first thing is, so many people are seeing their fathers in Trump and they don't realize it. They don't realize that the fathers they feared and don't have a relationship with are just like Trump. So they are drawn to his behavior because it's familiar. It's kind of like how when you see somebody date the same kind of toxic person over and over again, and then you find out that, oh, this is what they saw growing up. It feels normal. It feels normal. So, of course, what are they doing? The people that work for him, they're trying to win their father's love by pledging their allegiance to Trump. I also think that's interesting that so many people pledge their allegiance to him, but are against the indoctrination of our children by the books they read in the library. But what they're doing isn't indoctrination. And what's interesting? At one of the evangelical churches I went to, and I went to a bunch of them as when I was in my 20s, the ones with the white pastors only, I never saw this in the black church, but there was such a patriarchal attitude of not only does he know what's best for our congregation, he knows what's best about everything. Like in the black churches where I grew up, there was a board that actually would hold the pastor accountable. But I noticed that in the evangelical churches that I went to, like the boards weren't there to hold their pastors accountable. The boards and the pastors worked hand in hand to just do whatever the fuck they wanted. Like there's no checks and balances at all. So of course, evangelicals love Trump because they don't see anything wrong with what he's doing. They think that he has all knowledge and power. And I saw a TikTok earlier, and I wish I would have saved it. But if you know which one I'm talking about, please tag below. They were talking about how there are so many figures in the Bible that were problematic, that were also exalted as God's favorite, like David, that they don't think Trump's adultery is a big deal. They don't think anything Trump is doing is a big deal because also not only did David have adultery, he literally had the woman's husband killed. Send him to the front lines. I told y'all, I know my Bible. Send him to the front lines. Then you have Saul, who was just an absolute nightmare. You also have Solomon, who had so many women. I mean, he had concubines on concubines on concubines. Yet, we have Song of Solomon, we have the Proverbs, and Solomon was considered the wisest man around. But he just happened to have like a ton of women. So when you think about it, when you really think about it, to yes, and the point that that other creator was making, and again, if you know that creator's name or handle, please put it below. The Bible has so many shady figures that were literal kings. So for Trump, it's like, well, God can use anybody. Well, he who is without sin cast the first stone. Meanwhile, if a woman has sex before marriage, they're ready to kick her out of the church. But y'all aren't ready for that conversation. So going back to the evangelical churches, there is no process by which you can question your pastors. There isn't. You can ask for a meeting, absolutely. But usually what will happen in that meeting will be that you'll be either forced to repent for ever doubting the man in charge after you get a lengthy tongue lashing, which includes spiritual abuse. This is just my hypothesis of what usually happens based on things I've observed and heard. And if you're not thrown out of the church, and I know many people who were thrown out of one of the churches I attended, then you're basically put on lockdown. Like you might be sat down from ministry. You have to basically show that you repent for having the audacity to question someone in leadership. So when you get someone like Trump who's doing all this craziness, well, he's a man in leadership. You've already been conditioned to not question authority figures, especially not white male authority figures. You see how it's so gosh, I keep coming to the word insidious, but there are so many systems that work together to convince us that we are not to question authority, even though that was one of the things that was supposed to make this country great freedom of speech and whatnot. But when you have these systems that train you since you're a child that no, the white man knows what's best, and they step into these roles as like the paternalistic figure who is coming to save the day, even if even if he's an adulterer, even if he might be an undiagnosed narcissist, even if he says things that are crazy and is really actually too old to be in this position, they don't question him. And if they do, what are they met with? Rage. What does that remind them of? Their dad. So they just take it. And for these leaders, obvious character flaws are then spiritualized. You know, they're 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 either spiritualized or they're celebrated. Like I've heard of pastors who have cheated on their first wives and then celebrated their second wives from the pulpit, who is the woman that he cheated with. And the congregation usually falls in line, the ones that don't leave the church. But there's usually a big remnant of people that are like, well, I don't love it, but maybe God's going to use this to heal him and bless the church. And what kind of example would we be if we were just going to kick him out when he's clearly struggling? Like, it's built into Christianity. Submission to authority is baked into Christianity. So anyone who calls himself an authority figure, when they exert that authority onto you, you are supposed to submit. You're considered a problem if you don't submit to authority. You're considered someone they should watch out for when you ask too many questions. I ask a ton of questions. I like to understand things, but you do get this energy of you don't ask about that. You're asking too many questions. Let's also not forget the holy righteousness we have in these institutions. You see, you hear so much about how bad the world is. And for those who are not familiar, the world is what Christians call non Christians because we're supposed to be in the world and not of it. So you end up looking down on people who aren't Christian. You love the sinner, hate the sin. Even that statement is so offensive. It's so condescending, as if you are the authority figure on what's right. That is why you keep seeing religious people have such a foothold in politics because they think their way is right. So many of the battles we're fighting today are about religion and what religion says about women and what religion says about sex. You do walk around with this air of superiority because you're constantly being told from the pulpit, we know what's right. We're doing what's right. And everybody else out there is wrong. They are fallen. They are going to hell because they don't believe the way we believe. And I know that those types of ideas are not just limited to Christianity, but I'm only speaking on what I experienced personally. And I will tell you, the superiority complex is real. Like when I was really in it, you're encouraged to pray for others who don't believe the way you believe. So again, it's reinforcing this notion that what you believe is right and it's best. And you've got the white man in the pulpit who's telling you that what you believe is best, the way you do things is best, even down to the way you worship under this certain pastor is best. It's the right way. It's the right and proper way to do things. So I think an understanding of the way these churches work can maybe help you understand why there's such cognitive dissonance when it comes to what's all right for me versus what's all right for thee. Gosh, that's another one that I still have leftovers. I still have leftovers from my time in those institutions, but it's very real. The double standard is huge, huge. I mean, think about how many pastors have some affair or some sort of sex crime that comes out, and they rarely are brought to justice, but they'll usually be sent away for like a year. And then all of a sudden they're restored. And it's just fascinating that when their regular congregants just are human, they can be judged and kicked out. But if you're in leadership, there's a different set of rules. So I'm not surprised by the Christian response to Trump. I'm not. And again, when I say Christian, I'm talking about evangelical Christians because they're the loudest in favor of him. Black Christians were mostly for Harris. But if you had Black Christians that attended white-led evangelical churches, probably Trump voters.